Imagine waking up on land promised to you, only to find soldiers marching in, guns drawn, because gold was found beneath your feet. In 1876, the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho gathered at the Little Bighorn, unaware they stood on the brink of one of history's most shocking betrayals. The U.S. had signed a treaty to protect this sacred land, and then broke it for gold. What followed wasn't just a battle. It was a stand for survival, identity, and defiance at Greasy Grass. Before getting into more details, make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. The Sioux World in 1876. It was early summer in 1876. The plains were alive with the beat of buffalo herds and the quiet strength of families assembled in a serene encampment, roughly 6,000 to 7,000 people. This was not an everyday gathering. It was a rare time of unity. A coalition of Lakota bands included the Oglala, Hunkpapa, Brule, and Miniconjou. Their Cheyenne and Arapaho friends joined them. They had gathered together not for combat, but for ceremonial rest, and to be together in their own country, the hallowed valley known as the Greasy Grass. But peace did not last long. On June 25th, beneath the scorching sun and the weight of arrogance, General George Armstrong Custer made a decision that would impact history. He led his men, outnumbered and unsuspecting, directly into the middle of that massive encampment. Crazy Horse had already turned back 3 stars, General Crook, at the Rosebud not long ago. He fought like thunder, rumbling across the hills. After that, he traveled west to the Greasy Grass, where we were staying. We were always in our home country. Always. We did not go hunting for problems. We simply wanted to be left alone. However, the United States Army had different intentions. These families, warriors, children, and the elderly, were impediments to their progress. The warriors came not to discuss or comprehend, but to conquer, to crush something they couldn't control. The Army came to kill us. Many of them never left. They were rubbed out. This was our country. It has always been. We didn't want to be in trouble. What transpired next at the Battle of Little Bighorn would become legendary. However, for those who were present, including Black Elk, it was not folklore. It was life. The cost of defending one's home, way of life, and people against an army that didn't understand why they were fighting so fiercely was significant. A boy in the camp. In the middle of that large encampment beside the Greasy Grass River was a boy named Black Elk. He was Oglala Lakota, nearly 13 years old, and still considered a youngster by his tribe. He had never been in a battle, never took an enemy's scalp. He later stated, "I was just a boy until Little Bighorn." He and his family were members of Crazy Horse's band. Their teepees were just one element of a large gathering that stretched as far as the eye could reach. Thousands of lodges lined the ground, producing a settlement so large that Black Elk stated you could hardly count the teepees. The Hunkpapa and Oglala camped upstream and to the south. Next came the Miniconjou, Sanzark, Brule, and Yanktonai. Thousands of ponies grazed on the cliffs and riverbanks, strewn like stars across the hills. It was the spring of 1876. Tensions with the U.S. Army were growing, but life here went on as usual. Women were outside gathering roots. Children played and giggled by the water's edge. Men swam in the river to cool off from the rising summer temperatures. Good white buffalo. Calf, the wife of a revered Sioux chief, would later recall the morning. She explained, "The Sioux that morning had no intention of fighting. We expected no attack." She frequently led the sunrise dances, and on that warm June morning, as the river flowed with runoff from distant mountains, everything felt peaceful, even secure. But the signals had already started. The night prior, religious ceremonies swept across the village. Harry Chin, a Lakota medicine man, performed a bear-curing rite for a warrior injured in the recent battle with General Crook at the Rosebud. During the event, Black Elk was painted as one of the little bears. Yellow paint coated his entire body. Black stripes were drawn under his eyes. His hair was knotted and ornamented with eagle feathers. The battle begins. The morning of June 25, 1876 began as any other in the large community on the Greasy Grass River. The sun seeped softly through the lodge flaps, leaving long golden lines on the compacted earth. Families were starting to stir, the air still cold from the freshness of dawn. The children giggled and splashed in the river. The women were getting ready for the day. There was no indication that anything was about to change. Thunder was rumbling deep in the dust of the plains, however. Black Elk, just shy of 13, was playing in the river with his brother and relatives. They were greasing themselves with dirt and giggling like lads, completely unconscious of what fate had in store for them. That's when they overheard it. A quick and terrified yell from the village's outskirts. "The Chargers are on their way! Chargers are on their way!" It didn't register right away, but then the atmosphere changed. One tremor swept across the ground, followed by another. Then came the sound of hooves beating fast, furious and close. The alarm became louder beyond the riverbank. The horses whinnied, and the warriors roared. Then war shouts rang over the land, piercing and vibrant. "Hoka, hey! Ayo, hoka, hey!" Everything devolved into anarchy. The Lakota sentries had seen them, U.S. scouts and Arikara auxiliaries on horseback, approaching the Hunkpapa end of the camp and attempting to seize horses. Within minutes, gunfire ripped through the air. Dust erupted upward near Medicine Tail Coulee and Ash Creek. Custer's cavalry arrived quickly, storming in from the south. Black Elk remembers it vividly. "Everybody ran to catch their horses," he explained afterward. His older brother, on a sorrel pony, set out toward the Hunkpapa without his firearm. Their father hurried up to Black Elk, eyes wide and pulse beating, holding the forgotten gun. "Your brother went without his rifle," he commented. "Catch him and give it to him." Without thinking, the boy leaped on his pony and rode rapidly after his sibling. The dust was already rising like a tempest, transforming the bright morning into a shroud of grit and panic. Through the fog, Black Elk could see the silhouettes of Hunkpapa warriors, many still dripping from the river, running in all directions, shouting and gathering their weapons. Then he spotted them. The soldiers, big looming soldiers riding larger horses, galloped straight into the town, rifles blazing. It was the first time he'd seen the enemy so close, and they appeared fierce, tall, and lethal, like shadows with fire in their hands. His brother turned to shout, "Go back!" So they both turned their ponies and galloped to the camp's edge, into the timber, where several warriors were already gathering. Amidst the chaos, Lakota war leader Gall was everywhere at once, barking orders and grabbing men by the arms. Some men had turned and fled, but Gall's voice cut through the panic. "Have bravery! Don't be a woman!" It was sufficient to deter them. Men who had dropped their guns moments earlier turned and stood tall. They hastily painted their faces and grabbed whatever weapons they possessed, including bows, guns, and tomahawks. What about the women and children? They were running north, away from the conflict, carrying newborns, dragging the elderly, and tugging the tiny ones by their hands to get them to safety. Smoke started to rise. Hooves ripped up the ground. The village had become a battlefield. Crazy Horse, the famed Oglala war commander, heard the shooting while near the river. He had been among his pals, possibly laughing and sharing stories as young guys do, but when the gunfire rang out, he mounted his horse quietly. His paint was already on, his body powdered with river dirt, and his spirit prepared. He said a short prayer, anointed himself with sacred earth, and rode directly into the dust cloud. Word spread like wildfire. "Crazy Horse is coming! Crazy Horse is coming!" The warriors roared back, their voices rising with courage. "Hawkahay! Hawkahay!" The valley darkened under the weight of the rising dust and smoke from the battle. Black Elk could only see shadows moving, horses smashing, and men yelling. Gunfire sounded like thunder. Bullets rained into the river. He remembered soldiers attempting to run across the stream, but unable to outrun the Lakota and Cheyenne. Everyone was jumbled together now, friend and foe, man and beast. It was complete anarchy. The water swirled with hooves and blood. Then Black Elk witnessed something he will never forget. A soldier lay on the ground, severely wounded, but still living, his chest rising and falling in quick gasps. One of the Lakota warriors approached the youngster and yelled, "Boy, get off and scalp him!" Without hesitation, he leapt off his pony. His heart raced, but his hands remained firm. He attempted to sever the man's scalp, but the soldier's hair was too short and his knife was too blunt. So he did what he believed he had to do. He took out his rifle, pointed it at the soldier's head, and pulled the trigger. Silence. That was the first person he ever killed. The enormity of the situation didn't strike him until he rode near the women, who had congregated some distance away. His mother saw him coming and the scalp in his hand. Her face lit up, not with grief, but with pride. She celebrated by beating her buffalo hide hand drum and crying out to the others. Her son wasn't a boy anymore. He had entered the realm of men. Elsewhere in the conflict, Northern Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg was engaged in combat. During Reno's withdrawal, he dragged a U.S. trooper off his horse and fought him hand to hand. White Bull, a Cheyenne, discovered Custer's lifeless body during the last phases of the fight. He dragged it aside and prepared for a proper Lakota burial. Two Cheyenne women, who considered Custer a relative by adoption, intervened to prevent his body from being mutilated. They may have disagreed with him in life, but death is sacred. The dust soon began to settle. The screaming vanished. The horses slowed. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors had done the inconceivable. They'd vanquished Custer. For Black Elk, the war had ended. But things had changed. That river would never feel so lively. That morning would not be just another sunrise. He'd walked into manhood, war, and history. And though he didn't realize it yet, the world around him was about to change in ways that no one in that enormous community could have predicted. They'd won the battle. However, the struggle for their way of life had only just begun. Black Elk amid the fight. The sun was high when the true anarchy broke out on the hillside. The air shimmered with heat, yet the roar of gunfire pierced everything. I recall the noise, loud cracks, sharp like lightning, all around us. The entire field was alive with movement, including screaming, galloping ponies, and our people's war cries ringing across the bluffs. We had them encircled. The soldiers tried to defend their ground, but our fighters kept rushing forward from all sides. Our ponies ran wild, quick, and fearless, circling the army like a hurricane. The men continued to retreat, descending from one peak to another. They formed tight groups, what we subsequently dubbed 5 stands, and fought hard. They were clearly attempting to stay together by firing in spurts, but nothing lasted long. After about 10 minutes, each stand would either split apart or collapse. It did not take long. I was still young and little, and the battle was so thick and congested that I couldn't get close to the soldiers. All I could do was watch, but I could see it happening from where I was standing. From the riverbed, more of our troops surged up the slope, cutting off the soldiers' escape route. Warriors from the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes came in waves, roaring and riding fiercely, rifles and bows in hand. We were fighting not only for ourselves, but also for our families and our way of life, which the Bluecoats had attempted to take away from us. It was over within about an hour. Custer was dead. The majority of his guys, around 268 in all, were the same. Their dead were sprawled across the slope, and their rifles were suddenly silenced. A handful had attempted to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Few made it past us and slipped away. However, even with our win, we paid a price. I recall the pang in my chest when I saw some of our own lying still in the grass, perhaps a dozen or so. Brave soldiers, decorated in their finest war feathers, prepared to encounter the spirits. They rode out that morning knowing they might never return. They did not hesitate. That was the type of courage I witnessed that day. That's the kind of bravery we celebrated. We'd fulfilled Sitting Bull's vision. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho banded together to safeguard the territory they had long known. It was more than simply a war. It was a struggle for survival. For once, The invaders were left broken. By dusk, the dust had settled. The gunshots have ceased. We began gathering our dead and carefully brought them back to camp. Families sobbed, mourned, and sang songs of honor. The war drums had become muted, replaced by the steady beat of grief. I remember Chief Rain in the face, his face smeared with tears and wrath, pledging to avenge his brother who died in the conflict. The entire camp hailed his words. That night the village was quiet. The stars blinked above us like watchful ghosts, and our ponies were safe alongside our lodges. We felt grief but also pride. We'd battled together. We'd won together. So we created a stone memorial on the ridge, for our warriors, for the adversary too. We believed in honoring the fallen even during wartime. They battled hard and died far from home, but we were home, and it made all the difference. Aftermath and sources. As the sun sank low over the Little Bighorn River, casting long shadows across the hills, the camp grew quiet. The dust had settled, the war cries had faded, and the sounds of horses and mourning filled the air. What had just happened felt bigger than any of us could grasp at the time. For the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, it was a day of triumph. We had stood our ground. We had defended our land. We had answered the call of our ancestors and honored the sacred hoop of life. But deep down, many of us knew, especially the elders, that this victory would not go unpunished. And we were correct. Following Custer's defeat, the United States erupted in indignation. What was expected to be a brief assault against the hostiles had escalated into a national embarrassment. Politicians demanded vengeance. More troops surged into our territory. Within a year, the dream of freedom on the plains was fading. Sitting Bull, our holy man whose vision predicted our victory, was pursued. He eventually went to Canada, but he was unable to escape the U.S. government's growing clutches. He was later slain by Indian police in 1890. I lived. In the summer of 1876, I was just a boy. The battle at Little Bighorn was my first taste of conflict, death, and what it meant to be a warrior. But the world changed quickly after that. The troops never gave up. The bison, the heart of our survival, were nearly extinct. Hunger and cold drove many of us to the reservations. Years later, I joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. I traversed the world, riding horses for enthusiastic crowds in exotic locations such as London and Paris. But every night when the lights went out, I remembered the hill, the dust, that fight. My people are standing strong, and eventually I recounted my story. A white man named John Neihart approached me in 1930. I was old by then, but I still recall every sound, scent, and face. I told him everything, the war, the visions, the anguish, and the spirit of our people. That book became Black Elk Speaks, and as a result, our truth lives on. But I was not the only one. Other warriors, such as Wooden Leg of the Northern Cheyenne, also shared their stories, as did Arapaho fighters and elders from all over the plains. Their stories were compiled into books, journals, and museums. Historians and researchers worked throughout time to put together what transpired on the ridge by the Greasy Grass. Their voices are still echoing. If you visit the battlefield, now known as Little Bighorn, you might see the markers, the hills, and the location where Custer died. If you stay a bit longer and listen intently, you may experience something deeper. The spirit of the warrior, the music of women, the beat of the drum, the sacred memory. Today, our people return to remember those who fought. We dance, we sing, we remember. Just as the Lakota did in 1886, when they conducted a massive victory dance to honor those who had given their lives. Because while the combat may have ended long ago, the story has not. We did not fight out of hatred. We battled because we cared about our country, our way of life, and our children's futures. We did not want war. However, we refused to surrender. That's what the Greasy Grass represents to us. It was more than just a battle. It was a representation of who we were and who we still are. Black Elk's story isn't just history, it's memory, pain, and pride carried through generations. Custer's last stand wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a warning, a cry, and for those who lived it, a moment that never truly faded. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for the latest updates.